Hey guys, Toolman Tim here. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. January 13th, 2022, and this is episode 56 of the Workshop Podcast, and it's episode number 6 in our ongoing preparedness series. I'm rather excited. I always love talking about home maintenance and the art of home maintenance when help isn't around the corner. So let's dive in, but right quick before we do, 3 quick announcements to knock out. First off, I got to tell you guys, PBN, that's the Prepper Broadcast Network. You can hear me if you're watching on YouTube, you can always hear this live there or recorded later on. But they've been knocking it out of the park this week. I've had a ton of earphone time, which has been great. So I've been able to stay on top of just about everything. Monday night, they had the very first again live call-in show for Preppers Live on Monday night. It was awesome. I loved it. I'm going to have to get involved in that one of these weeks because, yeah, it's pretty cool. From there, we ended up having the Matter of Facts podcast. It was actually just one half of the normal duo along with his wife. And they talked about, I believe it was Hurricane Ida and all of the stress and everything that they ended up having to go through. It was an incredible story. You got time to listen to that. And then, of course, we don't have favorites, but I never ever miss the Next Generation podcast. Ryan and his son, they do a father-son duo where they talk about all kinds of whatever happens to be on the go, and they talk about being stranded in the snow and having to deal with all of the repercussions of being basically buried and how they dealt with it, how they got on with it, and yeah, it was an awesome episode. So if you guys got time, you want to take a chance, take a run over, check out all that stuff on the Spreaker app or anywhere that podcasts are found. Number 2, and this has been an awesome, busy week. If you guys follow me on social, you will know that I am now also part of an incredible collaboration podcast. I guess you could call it that. Fireside Freedom. It's like a bunch of old friends sitting around a fire, having a chat, drinking a beer or water or coffee or, some decaffeinated old man beverage, whatever it happens to be. And we're just going to chat about issues that are going on, come up with solutions, be positive, and have a whole bunch of different creators. There's 8 of us all together. Each week, there's going to be a mix of about 3 to 4 of us just chatting and having a great time. The first episode was a huge hit. That's Tuesday nights at 6 Central. You can get the link in the description tonight, which, yeah, check it out. It's been awesome. And third, and get this one out of the way too, I have now officially launched the Toolman Tim's Workshop Telegram channel and chat. So there's both there. You'll see the links in the description tonight. But if you want to have, that's going to be the central area where we get together and chat as a community. Telegram seems to be becoming more and more a part of my life all the time. It seems to be my go-to kind of de facto standard. And yeah, did I? I bet you I told something wrong. 6 Mountain, 7 Central for Fireside Freedom, guys. Brian was in there to correct me. I got too many live streams with too many time zones trying to keep on top of it all. But yeah, so check that out as well. But go by the Telegram channel and go from there. So who do we get in here tonight? I see my daughter, Charlotte. Thanks for dropping by. We got Brian from the Lots Project, as always, Mr. John Palmer, and we got Jake from Ravenwood Acres already. I know it has to go a long ways for the signal to get over to Korea, so thank you for stopping by and saying hello. Yeah, I'm sure the time's a little bit different there, but anyway, tonight we're going to see what kind of hot water we can get up to. We're going to talk about, the hot water systems in our home, the fact that hot water is life, the fact that it's pretty hard to do anything without being able to heat water, and we're going to talk about keeping the hot water on even when we have troubles. So let's dig into it, guys. And I know I did a little bit of research for this episode before we started. No, there won't be a whole lot of numbers and stats and stuff, but there'll be a little bit mixed in. As you know, the 2 most common, or if you don't, that's okay too. And I got to throw it in there. Jake says it's 11 a.m. on Friday. And where I am in Alberta right now, it's Thursday night at 7 p.m. So there's a bit of a time change, but thank you for taking time to come in and see us, man. So most common hot water heat. Back up a second here, guys. Has anybody ever noticed the fact that the term hot water heater is redundant? Because we're not heating the hot water, we're just heating water. So really, it should be water heater, but I'm sure I will catch myself. Hey, Joseph, how are you, sir? I'll catch myself as we go on. It reminds me of my grade 8 English teacher, Mr. Olson. He said, if you say you got something for free, that means you got it for nothing, because getting something free means that you got it for nothing. It's redundant, and I never forget that. And I still call it a hot water heater. It's not like we put toast in a toaster, we put bread in a toaster, but for some reason, it seems to be common vernacular to call it a hot water heater. So I won't give anybody grief for doing it because I'm sure I'll do it 100 times over. But once we get past, like I said, tanked, the tank style is by far the most common hot water heater, basically in North America. But tankless are becoming more and more popular. So we're going to touch on that as well. And there's some other systems out there, some kind of oddball, different stuff. But anyway, like I said, hot water really is life. It's one of those things that it's really hard to be involved in society and not have access to hot water, whether it's for sanitation, whether it's for disinfectant, whatever it is. I mean, just think, you guys, there's so many movie tropes, there's so many post-apocalyptic tropes, and what one isn't bigger than, the lonely traveler who's been on the road for 6 months fighting off the hordes and sleeping in ditches and having no food, and all of a sudden somehow they find a way to have a hot shower. It reminds me of Rick Grimes in The Walking Dead back when the show was still good, like 140 years ago. And he had just woke up out of the coma, and he was out walking around and carrying on, and he finally met up with Morgan and all those guys, and he's like, oh, you know what, there's a propane generator at the police station. And they went, and they were so joyous. Just there's something that takes a ton of stress off of a person because they can have hot water, whether it's internal hot water in the form of coffee or external hot water in the form of a shower. It absolutely makes a difference on the morale when everyone else is dealing with cold showers, Navy showers, or no showers at all. But it is, yeah, to me, it's just, yeah, it's deadly, deadly important. So the main types of hot water heaters, like I said, we got tank style, we got tankless style, and then we got heat exchanger style. And that one's a little more, well, definitely a lot less common, but it's usually from waste heat from natural gas furnaces. Could even be geothermal, but we're not going to touch on those a whole lot. Again, if you guys are new to the Preparedness series, I believe in, going with the odds, and I believe in teaching to the odds. So the most important thing to me is to get the information out there that's going to help the most people. And so we tend to deal with the systems and solutions that most people have in their homes. So in this case, it's going to be tank storage style water heaters, almost called them hot water heaters, and the tankless style. So anyway, and then at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about off-grid options as well. Wood-fired and solar heated. Those are, old-fashioned and new-fashioned, but they're both very effective, and they could be something that could get you by long-term to have buckets and buckets of hot water when all your neighbors are SOL. Now, there's even a few tied directly into your furnace systems, your home heating systems, and this is one of the few things that I'm really not well versed in to talk about, and they're not super popular anyway. We did talk a little bit about them last week in the hot water heating systems, circulating systems, boiler systems. So we touched on that a bit. So we're obviously not going to, delve into that too much. But, whether it's a prolonged power outage, whether you're just broke as a joke and you can't afford fuel or very little fuel, or you can't afford to hire somebody to come in and fix up your hot water heater because it just died, you need to have hot water. I'll tell you guys a little story. Back just before I met my beautiful, beautiful wife, who has made me a much better person than I would be on my own, I lived in a tiny little second floor apartment. And on the East Coast, as I've told you guys before, we used furnace oil out there to heat, and it's prohibitively expensive. And like I said, second floor, I had hot water heat and hot water, and yeah, oil heated my hot water, and it was also hot water for my entire apartment. And so I really had almost no money. And so every time I'd get paid, I would go over with a 5-gallon jug or two to to the local gas station and I would buy my own furnace oil and I would walk it back to my apartment because it was just kind of kitty corner to where I lived. Two 5 gallon jugs of furnace oil. And if it was a normal kind of average cold 2 weeks, that would last. I'd be on fumes come those last 2 weeks. The last couple days, I'd be kind of nervous. And if it was a cold snap, I would completely run out of hot water for 2, 3, sometimes 4 days at the tail end of it. And I had no more money. The month lasted longer than the paycheck. And so what I ended up doing was I bought myself a couple of electric space heaters. I put one in my bathroom and I put one in my bedroom. I would sleep in my bedroom, obviously, with the space heater going, and I was comfortable. And then in the mornings, I would heat up hot water on the stove and have a Navy shower before I'd go to work. It was so cold in my kitchen that the steam and everything was just like being outdoors almost, which is probably not good. The landlord probably wouldn't have liked that. But then I'd go into the bathroom with the space heater and wash up. So that being said, a person has to do what they have to do. And if you want to function in normal society and you want to get around, you got to have access to hot water sometimes. Just one of those situations where, I got by and I made do. And that's the whole idea. Sometimes we got to think outside the box. Sometimes we got to it's not perfect, but we figure out what we need for hot water. So the one that makes up the majority of everybody's home heating systems are just those typical 40-gallon cylindrical, there's the word, Tim, cylindrical hot water tanks that almost every house has sitting in the basement somewhere. That's the most popular. And they come in 30 to 80 gallon size, but the most common by far, the one you see sitting on the road on garbage day when they have bulk pickup day, is almost always the 40 gallons. Those are the most popular by far. Hey, Chris, I see Chris Dixon just showed up. And it says Chris Dixon is not 50, so it must be 49. Anyway, 4 main fuel sources for all of these. The big ones. Oh, hey, Ted, how are you? Natural gas is by far the most popular in North America. Makes up 65% of all hot water heat is natural gas. 30% is electric. That's electric's very popular where I grew up, of course, and it's somewhat popular out here, but we have a lot of natural gas. And then the remaining 5% is split evenly amongst propane and what's the other one? Fuel oil, like furnace oil, like I talked about, that weird diesel stuff that they use on the East Coast and up and down Boston and New England states. So first off, we're going to talk about tankless in just a minute, but a few tools that we can have on hand every single time that will build just a tiny little what do you want to call it? Toolbox that we can work on any type of hot water heater. You want an adjustable wrench, a pipe wrench, an insulated slot screwdriver. Ask me about that one because you're going to end up zapping yourself if you're not careful. Then a little more specialty, a deep socket to fit the element. Some of the elements are kind of recessed in the top of the tank. We'll talk about that later. And then definitely an electrical tester or a multimeter or multimeter, whatever you want to call it. And we have a special guest this evening. We see Tom from the Small Scale Life. How are you, sir? He has an electric hot water heater, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about those tonight because I have a lot of experience with them, and they are surprisingly easy to work on. They can be a little bit intimidating when you first start. Trust me, I know. But there's almost nothing to them. And I'm sure Joseph knows too. He's worked on them a ton over the years, I bet you. Let's get the tankless out of the way. This is the area that I've worked on the least, but over time, they seem to be becoming more and more popular. My wife and I, we're actually looking at possibly getting one just because we're having trouble keeping up with the hot water demand. I don't love the idea because the big downside to tankless, of course, is you lose that built-in storage of 40 gallons of water. I love having 40 gallons of water. Even if you have no heating, any way to heat it at all, you've got that storage of that extra bit of water. So you lose that. But what's great about tankless is unlimited hot water. And Chris Dixon says it's a tankless job. Yeah, it is a tankless job. There, see, what are we in? Anybody time it? 14 minutes, 33 seconds, and we got our first dad joke. So that's pretty good. But yeah, so what do you do with a tankless hot water heater? Water heater. See, I caught myself again. First off, routine maintenance. Even though they look like basically a glorified phone book hanging up on your wall, And if anybody's under the age of 30 listening, sorry about that. What could we call it? An empty Amazon box. That's what we'll call it. But yeah, so learn how to flush it. So basically, you're going to disconnect on either side, and then you're going to take a small, an AC or a DC pump, whatever you have, and and you're going to want to force vinegar inside there or CLR, and you're going to want to flush it through, catch it on the other side, and keep pumping it through until there's no more scaly calcium type stuff, any debris coming out the other side. Then you want to flush it 2 or 3 times with warm water and get it clear, and that's it. That there's really not a lot that you can do with tankless water heaters. Once you've learned how to flush it, then believe it or not, there's an air filter on there, and you're gonna kind of sense a theme tonight, but hot soapy water seems to be the way to go with pretty much anything on a tankless water heater. So you're going to take that out. You're going to clean it with a non-abrasive brush, some kind of bristly brush or something, and just soak it, rinse it around, and reinsert it. And then there's also a water filter in those. And that works just like the filter you're going to see if you've ever hooked up a washing machine and they have those inline filters to catch lint and debris and stuff in the back. That's the one of those. Yeah, that's exactly it. And Ted says, this is good. I got to read it. He says, Toolman Tim, you'll never get those girls out of the shower. A friend of mine told me he installed a tankless to save money, but everyone stayed in the shower so long it ended up being more expensive. And that, Charlotte, if you're in here, you know all about those problems. But yes, that I absolutely believe that. And that is probably the downside is the fact that you have unlimited hot water is both a positive and a negative because, yeah, everybody's going to enjoy it and stay in there for 3 times as long and end up using more fuel, right? So, yeah, that's a good one, Ted. Now, hot soapy water, air filter, debris filter, water filter, whatever you want to call it. Wipe the outside of the unit down. So here's the other thing: know how to reset it. Some of them you can just basically either unplug or flip the breaker, turn them back on. Sometimes they just kind of hang up, and you need to. But here's the other side to hey, PA Prepper Josh Sloan is in the house. How are you, sir? The downside to tankless hot water heaters is they're basically run by they have some kind of circuitry in them. So anything that's computerized isn't very preparedness minded, or, I prefer to go with simple parts that you can replace if you can. And so if something in there dies, your best option is to have an extra tankless hot water heater on hand and know how to replace it. Because if the motherboard or the circuits or whatever runs it ends up dying, there ain't nothing you can do about it other than replace it. So the best thing you can do is have an extra one of the same model on a shelf in your basement just waiting. And then if you take the old one down, don't throw it away because there could be salvageable parts in there. And that's one of the tenets of preparedness is save the old parts that aren't broke down or aren't wore out. But yeah, that to me, and I know that's expensive, and I'm not saying that's for everyone, but that is a great way, 2 is 1, 1 is none, because there are parts that just aren't serviceable and aren't able to be fixed inside of those tankless water heaters. So my best solution for that, keep an extra one on hand or stick with the old-fashioned style. So yeah, so supplies to have on hand if you've got a tankless, some CLR or vinegar. I love, cheap insurance, have a couple extra filters. Can you run it without a filter for a bit? Sure you can. Absolutely. And if you do, you'll probably be okay. But get yourself an extra air filter, get yourself an extra water filter, keep them on hand. Like I said, keep the old one for parts, know how to turn it off. If it's a gas one, before you work on it, know how to turn the gas off. Every week I talk about it, but it is absolutely true. I'm going to have to do the 10 commandments of preparedness or something, but the first one is going to be thou shalt not work on something without the main shutoff turned off, something like that. That's where we're heading with it, right? But it's true. And then know how to, basically follow the process in reverse to put it back together. That's really all there is to it. And like I said, if there's gas, turn it off, then turn it back on. And you're just going to have to deal with the gas hookup and disconnect. That's it. Yeah. So from there, let's deal with the de facto. Oh, that's a big word, Tim. De facto standard in hot water, and that is the 40-gallon hot water tank. Now, there's big differences between the electric and the natural gas, but the principle behind it is exactly the same. So we're gonna first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna look at those tanks. You're gonna say, oh yeah, I know right where it is and how it works. Now, I'm gonna give you guys a few random thoughts, things that you should probably know. At least in the realm of electric hot water tanks, most of them come off the shelf with a 6 or 7 year warranty. And that's usually the entire tank is replaced. So look into your warranty ahead of time, because if you do have some, and they vary between, there's not too many companies that actually make them anymore, but, they vary between whether they cover just the tank or they cover the labor as well. So just keep an eye on that. Uh, get familiar with your warranty, because it could save you a lot of time. And, we're not just talking about, shit hits the fan, worst case scenario. We're talking about knowing how to get shit done without it costing you a whole lot of money. So, yeah. And Brian says, if you need to leave it on to work on it, you should let someone that knows what they're doing fix it. Yes, absolutely. And that is true. So, we talk about it a lot. Uh, the big, one of the mindsets of preparedness is doing things you're not comfortable doing, but not doing things that you're so uncomfortable with, you don't even want to do it. So, baby steps, the old Bill Murray, what about Bob movie, baby steps out the door, baby steps down the road, that kind of stuff. And what we're going to do is every time you attempt to repair or do something, you always want to stretch yourself just a little bit. So, you know, do something that's just a little harder than what you did last time, that kind of stuff, right? So we're always trying to learn something just a little bit new. Um, Victor says, Texas all electric house with standard tank heater and tankless. The tankless has two 220-volt 60 breakers. So wow, 460 amp circuits. Don't follow my mistake. Natural gas or liquid propane for tankless. Yes, I understand. Yeah, that's tankless. Yes. So on the East Coast, the groundwater was fairly cold out there where I used to work at Home Hardware, and it was very difficult to even get an electric tankless hot water heater that could keep up with the demand and bring it, because each one can only bring up enough. There's only so much temperature rise built into them, and that's a huge draw. So yes, I absolutely. I should have said that. If you're going tankless, definitely look at some sort of gas, whether it's natural gas or liquid propane, because yeah, there's a lot of electric. Um, and Tom says, which Bill Murray character? I'm partial to the golf course caretaker approach. Kaboom. Yes, that too. But yeah, oh yeah, I should say we're gonna have this will be the second annual uh, Groundhog Days contest. I don't know why I love Groundhog Day, but I launched one last year on Groundhog's Day, and we used a clip from the movie. So there'll be another one launching on February 2nd. So keep an eye out for that. Just a Bill Murray fan. And Jaggy Thistle, my brother from another mother, Craig, across the pond in, I was going to say jolly old Scotland, but that's not right. But he's from Scotland anyway, guys. Nice to see you, sir. So yeah, now here's the next thing. If you have an electric hot water heater or even the gas one, know how to turn the temperature up on those. And a lot of people are like, well, I didn't know I could adjust the temperature. So we're going to get into it, but most of them have one or two access panels, top and bottom, and they're literally two screws for each panel, or sometimes it's just one screw and the whole panel flops out. That's it. So you open that up, and the first thing you're going to see down there is a little, almost looks like a little clock hand, and you just put a screwdriver into that. That's why I said an insulated screwdriver, and you just turn it up or turn it down as needed. I mean, most homeowners have never even bothered to think that they could adjust their temperature to their hot water tank on their own. Just didn't even know it. And it's so simple. It's the type of thing that some people, Chris says, but don't show your wife. Yeah, I understand that. But it's something so simple. But most people are like, oh, I'll just hire a plumber or an electrician to come in and do it. And there's nothing to it. Now, here is the thing I want just about everybody to get into their head. Every single part on a water heater, especially an electric one, is replaceable. The only time you're ever going to want to replace the entire tank is if there's a leak in the actual tank. Other than that, every single part, for the most part, is inexpensive or relatively inexpensive, and honestly, not above a novice handyman to replace themselves. So, we're going to talk about all the different parts, but I just want everyone to know that if it's something simple, well, honestly, just about everything in an electric hot water heater is simple and it's something you can do. The University of YouTube is really good to you. Ted says, I have a timer on my 30-gallon electric hot water heater. Just turn it off when you know you won't need it. Yeah, and there's a lot of people that just put inline switches, or if they're going to be away for a while, it's great because then you can save yourself just a little bit of money. I never mind that. So we're going to talk about routine maintenance first because I'm an old man and I love prevention is preparedness and preparedness is prevention. So anything we can do in the realm of routine maintenance is going to end up probably solving problems that we never even knew were going to happen, right? So, test the pressure relief valve. So once a year, go downstairs, and if you look at your tank, there's going to be this weird looking kind of L-shaped, it looks like a valve with a little pull-up spring-loaded nozzle on it or handle. You're going to want to stand back a little bit and just pull that up once right quick and make sure it automatically shuts off on its own. That is exactly what it is. If for some reason your tank goes nuclear and heats up so much that the inside wants to act like a bomb, that's going to, once it hits a certain pressure, is going to open up and it's going to blow that hot water and pressure out of there. So that is, just test it once a year, make sure it's working, because sometimes the inside spring loaded mechanism doesn't work anymore and it won't open, or it can also happen that it stays open as well. So once in a while it might blow off. It shouldn't, but if it ever did and it stayed open by mistake, you can end up losing quite a bit of hot water. And worse than that, it could just keep filling and keep going out on the ground. So that's something to check. Now, number two, inside your hot water tanks is going to be what they call a sacrificial anode rod. That sounds like something from Star Wars, I think. But basically, what it is a long, I don't know if you can see it, but basically half to two-thirds the length of the tank. It's just an aluminum or magnesium rod that screws down inside, and it attracts any of the nastiness that's in there. So basically, anything that's trying to cause corrosion or rust, it's going to chew that up, and it's going to look like, oh, it's hard to explain, but it's going to look like sometimes when I was a kid and we used to find railway ties on the beach, and the railway spikes. Well, they'd end up being attacked by the salt water for many, many years, to the point where they basically just look like a rusty old nail. Everything had been eaten away from it. And that's what's going to happen with the anode rod. And if you take it out of the top and pull it out, if you can see the inner core, or if it's completely covered in calcium, or it looks like it's going to fall apart if you just look at it the wrong way, throw it out and get a new one. Cheap insurance. And checking that out once a year can end up extending the life of your hot water tank a metric shit ton. Let's just put it that way. Chris says, we got to deal with a split tank this last fall. One of the boys called up and said, it's raining in my room. I would be sick to my stomach. We had a bank property last year we had to go look at that had been abandoned right before all the craziness happened. Didn't tell anybody. They left it for a full year with water on and no heat on. And the entire tank ruptured and froze. It kind of looked like a wave coming out that had just frozen solid right there. It was insane. It's crazy the amount of pressure that's in them and the amount of water that's in them, even though you don't think it's that big of a deal. Yeah. Tom says, check the anode rod once a year. Check. Yes, that's it, absolutely it. And it's cheap insurance. If I ever get fancy enough and high tech enough, maybe I'll start having some slides and things. But yeah. All right. Next, inspect the dip tube. And I'm not making a joke, and I'm not I'm not making fun of anybody. There's actually inside your tank at the top, there's going to be a plastic tube that goes almost all the way to the bottom. And what that does is the fresh cold water that comes in, instead of going in on the top and fighting with the hot water that's in there, it puts the cold water at the bottom, lets it heat up and cycle through. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's just something to check. And if it ends up, they're plastic, and unless your water's like insane or something, it should be good for a long time, but it never hurts to check that out either. And then here's a big one. You need to know how to flush your sediment out. My brother-in-law, they're on a drilled well out on an acreage, and they have a lot of calcium and nasty shit that builds up in there. And once in a while, they ended up having to, they live in a mobile home. So they have a small tank that's in a really small, what they're like really small enclosed area. And he had to, try to flush it out because it just kept getting built up and built up. And eventually it wrecked his water tank and he had to replace it. But we're going to talk about it later. But flushing the tank is another hugely important thing. And then this one is optional, but I kind of like it. Now, if you look at most tanks at the bottom, there's going to be a drain valve as well. And they're just they're literally made out of plastic, like it's the most junky plastic. And it's going to look like a valve, like an outside tap that's missing the handle. And you can open and close that again using our slot screwdriver. It never hurts to open that up a little bit, bleed a little bit of water off. You can actually bleed a bunch off and check it for sediment. And if there's no sediment in there, you know that it hasn't filled up a whole lot. But it's good to just test that just in case in an emergency you ever need to drain your tank. You want to know that that damn thing's going to work when you do it. Parts to keep on hand, like I said, you want to have an extra anode rod, an extra pressure relief valve, and then this is where we get into the fun stuff. You want to keep an extra bottom and top element, and what they look like, there's nothing to them really. They look like, have you ever seen an electric branding iron? Most people probably haven't, but they're 6-8 inches long, and they're just oh, I know what they look like, the elements in the bottom of an electric stove, except they're short and they just go down and out. And you just, if you ever have to replace one, you're going to take it out and you're going to look on it and it's going to say the voltage and the wattage. If it's a 40-gallon tank, 99% chance it's 240 volts or 220 volts. But then you want to match it up with the wattage and the rough size of what it is. That's it. And so from there, what else? We need an upper and a lower thermostat. And all these parts, like, I'm not kidding when I say you could buy every single part you need to replace your hot water tank for under $100, have them all on a shelf, and always know that it's there. If you want an extra drain valve, because they're made out of plastic, and if you're ever frigging around in your basement and you accidentally drop something on it, you might need to replace one of them. Okay, so now we talked about routine maintenance. Now we're going to talk about the four big, is that four? There we go. Four horsemen. The four horsemen of water heater problems, the things that happen. The first one is simple, but it can be the worst one too, and that's leaking. So what you want to do, here's what we're going to start. Plumbing fittings. So you're going to go all the way around the tank and you're going to see wherever, there should really only be 2 or 3 connections where water's coming in, but you're going to check those and see if they're leaking. If they're leaking, try tightening them down a little bit. If they're still leaking, turn the water off, drain your tank, take them off, retape them, put, pipe dope on there, seal them back up, check it out. If it's, say, a cracked pipe or something, you're going to want to repair the pipe. That's what you look at first. Then you're going to check your pressure relief valve. Sometimes they wear out and they start leaking. So you're going to go over there, and it's going to be a brass one, about 2/3 the way up on the side of the tank. If it's not there, you're going to check the drain valve, the plastic one. If it's not coming out of there and it's not a fitting, then it's probably coming out of the bottom of the tank. And that is, like I said, the only time that you're going to want to replace a tank is once the tank has rusted through or corroded through and it's leaking itself. You're hooped at that point. There's nothing you can do. A few things, like I said, that you can do to mitigate that. If you guys have ever seen them, they have water heater pans. They just look like a great big brownie pan. Imagine making a brownie pan or a round cake pan. They're 3-4 inches high, and you put them down under your hot water tank before you install it, or before you fill it, of course. And then it just gives you a little, so if you have a small leak, it's going to end up catching that water before it goes somewhere else. It's going to give you somewhere to notice it as well. Because if it's, say, in a spongy material or on a wood floor or something, it might soak into the floor and you might not notice it for a long time. But if you have one of those basins on there, it's going to give you added insurance, and it's also going to allow you to see it. And Brian says the bottom drain is where you could get the water if you have no water pressure. Yes. So off-grid, worst case scenario. And let's back up. One time I was so I go into these abandoned bank properties, and are you guys familiar with the term getting caught short? Anyway, it'd been a long day. I'd been on the road all day, and there was no way I was making it back up those stairs without having an awful, awful mess. So I said, what am I going to do? I didn't have any garbage bags with me. The water was turned off in the house. I just ran over to the bathroom and I had my way with the toilet. Let's put it that way. And then I thought, I have to flush this. I can't leave that there. It's going to get me in trouble. I don't know what's going to happen. And then it dawned on me, hot water tank, Tim. So I found a cleaning bucket over there, and I went over to the hot water heater. I opened up the pressure relief valve or the bottom drain. I think I started with the pressure relief valve, and I didn't quite get enough water, but I got enough water that I was able to flush the toilet and not leave a surprise for the realtor. So in an emergency, think outside the box. But yes, you are right. Jake says, I had to replace mine last year because it was leaking around the lower heat element, not the threads, but the welded threaded insert. Yep. And that is definitely an area that it can happen. Tom says, real world stuff with Toolman Tim. Real talk, real shit. Absolutely. I've got more shitting stories than anyway. But yeah, there's lots of good stories there. But yeah. So oh yes, here's a good one from Ted. Keep a water alarm in your pan. Cheap insurance. That I never even had that in my notes, my friend. That is an awesome idea. And yeah, it's true. Put something in there. A lot of times you can pick them up. We got them at the farm store here in town. And basically all they are, most of them are battery powered, and they just have two connectors on them. And if those connectors are crossed when they, touch water or whatever, they just start going great. So yeah, that is great. And Jake says JB Weld would have been good. You would have been good. Yes, absolutely. JB Weld's great, and it gets you through a lot of bad situations sometimes. Yeah, so that's what I said. If you end up having a leak like that, that's what we call a catastrophic damage, and it's time to get rid of the tank. And even so, that is something that any preparedness-minded person can do. A little more work, take a little bit of time, but it can be done. But that's the only time you're ever really going to need to replace the entire tank. And also, if you're ever in a situation where the tank is so full of sediment that it's too heavy to haul up the stairs, get out a reciprocating saw and cut that bastard in half. There's no reason not to at that point because the thing's wrecked, right? Most hot water tanks are literally just thin metal, sheet metal around the outside, and 1 or 2 inches of spray foam on the inside. Just cut that sucker in half and then scoop out all that junk until it's light enough that you can carry it up and out of there. And Ted says he keeps one under all of his sinks as well. And that's a good idea. I never really thought of that, but I'm a huge fan of cheap insurance. And that is that. Thank you, Ted. I always love having Ted in here because he always has good, feedback for us. It's great. Okay. So first problem was we got leaks. We got water coming where it shouldn't. Number 2, we got zero hot water. First thing you're going to do, remember what I said? One of the rules of preparedness, always try the simplest solution first. So you're going to go over to your breaker and you're going to look at your breaker and you're going to say, okay, because I have a well-labeled breaker panel, I'm going to know which one runs my hot water tank. Now, if you don't, it's going to be a 220 breaker, which means it's going to be a double pole. So it's going to have 2 switches normally, or it's going to have what looks like 1 switch, but it's wide enough to be 2. It's like 2 connected. And even if it looks like it's not tripped, what you're going to do is you're going to flick it to the off and then flick it hard back to the on, because it seems like more and more it used to, and maybe I'm just, old or something, but it seemed like when I was a kid, or maybe it was just mom and dad's breaker panel, but when breakers used to pop or trip, you could look at them and know it. But man, most panels I deal with now, when they trip, they barely even move it to the middle. Like you almost can't tell. So you're going to flick it off and on, sometimes 2 or 3 times if you have to, but mainly flick it all the way to the off, all the way to the back on. And if that's your problem, Bob's your uncle. You're good to go. Now, next you're going to check the high temp cutoff switch is what it's going to be called. So if for whatever reason your hot water tank overheats, there's going to be a shutoff switch in there. And you're going to open up your access panel, and there's going to be a big red button right there at the top. I'm pretty sure it's usually at the upper thermostat. So you're going to open up and you're just going to depress that red button. And it should, if it was because the water got too hot, once it's cooled down a bit, that should get things going again. However, if it shuts off again, it might be time to start doing your inspections. Check your elements, check your thermostats, and go from there. But that's number 2. Now, if that doesn't do it, and you have absolutely no hot water, there is always the off chance that both of your elements are dead. Now, you might say, Tim, what are the chances of both elements dying at the same time? Well, pretty slim. But what's more likely is one of your elements went, and you didn't notice it, you might have thought, oh, okay, well, the hot water is not as hot as it was, or we're not getting as much hot water as we used to, but we just learned to live with it. And, if both elements are dealing with the same amount of junk in the hot water, then they're going to have about the same life. So if you've been dealing with a weird kind of hot water situation for a while, there's a good chance that maybe the second one went. So it may be time to pull both elements and replace them, or check your thermostats and replace them. Now, here's number 3. If the water is hot, hot as normal, but it runs out super quick, this is where you're going to go from there. That almost always means a defective lower element. So when you look at your hot water tank, and this is going to be obvious, but you've got those 2 access panels on the front of it. And on some of those, your top element's going to be in there. And in all of them, the bottom access panel is going to have your bottom element. So you're going to get out your multimeter, your electrical tester, whatever you want to call it, and you're going to test it for continuity. You're going to put, red on one side, black on the other, and you're going to see if you have a current going through. If you do, okay, that's good. But then you're going to haul it out, because if you have continuity and you're still not getting any heat, you're going to pull it out and you're going to see, and there's a good chance it's going to be covered in calcium or just an overall nasty buildup. So even though you have continuity going through the element, none of the heat is getting out there because it has this nasty old buildup of crud on there. And you can't clean that. Replace it. Now, if it's clean, then your thermostat's bad and you're going to replace that. That's it. So there's those 3. And I know you're like, Tim, you're glossing over it. There's a lot of good videos out there. Obviously, this is mainly just an audio format, so it's kind of hard for me to explain it all. But it is literally, use a socket to pull out. Some are sockets, some are screws, but you're just going to remove the element and then you're going to disconnect the thermostat. It's a couple of wires, a couple of screws. You just want to know what you're doing, and you want to know you have the replacement parts on hand already. Number 4, lukewarm water. And this one's a little different, but first off, if your water just seems to be a little bit lukewarm, you can always start by just turning your thermostat up a bit. Because sometimes, a little bit of buildup's getting in there and your elements aren't working quite as efficiently as they used to. So you might be able to get by for another year or 2 with just turning your element or your thermostat up just a little bit. And that's it. And if that's all you need, great. Now, the next thing you want to do is you want to check your dip tube again, because if that broke off, what you end up having is all that cold water is coming in and mixing with the hot water really quick, and it's never circulating and cycling. So you're never really getting piping hot water. It's really that simple. Thanks, Brian. I appreciate that. It is. It's not hard to do. 3/4 of everything that I teach and talk about on this channel is stuff that anybody can do, but our brain gets in the way. We get nervous, or we feel overwhelmed, or we think, oh my God, I need to go to school for 4 years to learn how to do that. And it's not true. And you know what? That happened to me this last summer. I was like, I never did vinyl siding before. I can't do this. Well, my entire house is vinyl sided and I did it all by myself. And it's not because my brain didn't get in the way. It did. But eventually, thanks to my wife and, working on it, I managed to do it. And that's exactly how all of this is. I've said before, desperation is a good motivator. And a lot of times having no hot water and knowing you got either a grumpy wife upstairs or a dirty baby that needs to be washed is really good motivation to figure out how to get this stuff done. Or again, one of my favorite ones, abject poverty is a good motivator too. But who doesn't want to save a little bit of money? Plumbers are expensive. HVAC guys are expensive. So why not know how to do all this ourselves? So like I said, if the dip tube's broken, replace it. That should be. And if your dip tube is broken, that's a simple and cheap fix. There you go. Now, if it's not that, it's going to be a defective upper element. You're going to test it. We're going to go through the same process, use your multimeter, all of that. And hopefully that's all it is. If your element tests good, haul it out, check it for buildup. No, okay, put it back in, replace the thermostat. That's it. And Brian says, those damn dirty babies always needing to be washed. Yeah, it's true. It was like when our septic tank backed up and we had kids in the house. It's like, what do you do, right? Okay, now here's the next thing. And this is almost as important as any of the other stuff I've talked about tonight. Know how to refill your water heater. Because of course, if you're going to replace an element, you need to drain the tank down enough so it's below the level of the element so that the water doesn't come gushing out. I did forget to mention that. That's kind of important. Okay. Now, here's a funny thing. Whenever we used to sell an electric element for a hot water tank at Home Hardware where I worked, we would always ask them, "Do you know the proper process for refilling the hot water tank?" And just about without fail, they'd roll their eyes or scoff and be like, "Yeah, I know how to refill a water tank," because everybody figures all I got to do is open up the water and let it run until it's full. And that's kind of it. But if you don't do it right, you can burn up a brand new element the minute you put it in your tank. So, first off, watch a couple of videos on how to refill a tank. They're not difficult, but Ted says, I always tell my clients, don't worry, if anything goes wrong, we'll fix it. And it's true. Yeah. And you know what? If you ever get yourself in a bad way, all you got to do is put your tail between your legs and call for help. Unless there isn't any help to be done, then you got to end up figuring out how to do it. Like me today, I'm going to do a video on this later on, but I got stuck way out in the sticks, way out on a grid road. I was checking on a bank property, and it was literally like I was stuck for a half an hour and not a single car came by. But I didn't sit there and wait for somebody to come by. I started figuring out my solutions, and I figured out a way to get myself out using what I had and what I could scrounge up around there. But yeah, sometimes you just can't sit around. You just got to do it. And worst case, it never hurts to ask for help. But yes, open them faucets. Yes. So I'm not going to go into great detail, but learn the process, because here's the thing. If you don't um, open up the faucets and let the water run free, you're going to end up getting air bubbles in your hot water tank. And when you put those elements in there, a brand new element in there, those bubbles are going to want to collect around that element. And if there's even a single, and this is going to sound scary, but it's not, if there's even a single air bubble around that element, it's going to fry it basically instantly. And there was more times than not, some stubborn, big feeling customer would come back with their tail between their legs and say, I need a new upper element. And you're like, didn't we ask you? Anyway, so we had an entire print up done, and it's not difficult, but basically you take your time, tap the sides, flush it, flush it, flush it. And then usually, all the air's out of there. But yes, watch a couple of videos on that, guys. That's really the only thing, is just to make sure you get every last drop of air, every last breath of air out of there, just to make sure so there's no bubbles on those electrical elements when you put it in. And Ted says, did you try to fix it? Always charge more when they say yes. Yeah, because you never know what you're going to, deal with, right? Okay. And then, so like I said, those 40-gallon tanks are absolutely, the one that everybody is drawn to, everybody seems to have. Now, there's also the gas version, and they are just as simple, and in some ways, they're even simpler. I actually discovered, and this is going to make me sound like a dummy, but a few months ago when I was labeling my electrical panel, I discovered that my gas hot water heater requires zero power. There's literally no power running to it. I was pretty impressed. So yeah, it's kind of cool. On a gas hot water heater, a lot of the same stuff. You're going to have an anode rod. We talked about that already. You're going to have a dip tube. Also talked about that already. You're going to have a thermocouple, which we'll talk about a little bit later. You're going to have a thermal cutoff switch. You're going to have the burner assembly, which basically looks like a glorified side burner on a propane barbecue. That's going to be in underneath. And you're going to have an igniter. That's it, guys. Each of these parts are as easy as disconnecting a couple of screws, maybe a wire connector, and then replacing it with a new part. Like I said, whenever you start attempting these repairs, the first thing you do, one of your best tools you have, is that digital camera built into your iPhone or your Android. Take a picture before you start, because if you frig up too bad, you can always at least put it back together the way it looked before you started. And also, you have a way to know where the new part goes in. Simple stuff, right, guys? So how do you deal with a few of the problems in the gas? Pilot light won't stay on. What do? Good chance it's a bad or a faulty thermocouple. So you're going to remove the old thermocouple. That's basically something that just heats up and opens up and lets how does it work? When it heats up, it opens up and lets the gas flow. And if it isn't working properly, it won't let the gas come in. I don't know all the science behind it, but thermocouple is one of the things that goes in almost a lot of times that's one of the most often broke down parts on a gas water heater. So how do you test them? You're going to find it down at the bottom. You're going to unscrew it and you're going to put one lead on the copper, one lead on the silver, and then you're going to try to light the heater and you're going to watch it and see if it starts running power through it. If it does, it's still good. If it doesn't, you're hooped. And in an absolute pinch, you can actually clean the old thermocouples. I wouldn't recommend it, but if you don't have one and you've got nothing else to get you by, a little bit of emery cloth or some steel wool sometimes can clean it up just enough to get rid of all that buildup on there. Brian says, I use my phone camera on the job all the time. Great resource and insurance for my bad memory. For sure. And you know what? Here's the other thing, guys. When you start a job, everybody thinks you're going to start a job and you're going to work your way to the end, right, start to finish, and never, nothing bad's ever going to happen, right? But I remember back to when I repaired computers for about 6 months when I was living in Saskatchewan. And you'd always have a laptop in, and they were always so weird about how to fix and every little part and every little screw. And you always swore you were going to remember where everything went. But more times than not, you'd tear the damn thing apart, realize you needed the part, order the part, and it'd be 4 weeks later before you're putting it back together. So taking pictures throughout the process, because if you get interrupted, I mean, hey, if you're halfway through repairing your electric hot water heater and all of a sudden your next door neighbor hollers and says, hey, I got some beer for you. Well, of course you're going to stop, or maybe he's going to come in and help you, but you might need to stop for a few minutes. Who knows what happens? And then you got to go back to it. Just take some pictures. If you don't need them, just delete them next time you're cleaning your phone up. From there, like I said, guys, I always take the concept of two is one is none. And for me, my added to that is two is one is none, three is a guarantee. Not an actual guarantee, but if you have 3 ways to heat hot water or 3 ways to repair your existing hot water heater, to me, that is one of the best preparedness mindsets we can have, right? So we've talked about what we have in our home, how we can repair it, the parts we can keep on hand. How about some off-grid or worst case scenario options? What can we do for hot water? And I mean, some of these are drop dead, super simple. But, the first one is if you got a wood stove in your living room or, um, a wood cook stove in your kitchen, just a great big pot of water, set it up there and just leave it throughout the day. And you've always got hot water. And if it's too hot, well, what do? Just add a little bit of cold water to it. You dilute it and you get a little extra hot water, right? Simple as that. But that is literally the fire in a pot. Yeah. I mean, that's how our ancestors and the Neanderthals did it, basically. As soon as they could make a container to carry water in, they figured out how to heat it up on an open flame, right? And if you guys aren't familiar with the term a Navy shower, it's basically a sponge bath. You're basically just washing the important parts with the hot water and doing it quick. It's something we do in our camper quite often because we have a very, very, very small hot water tank, but it works. Ask Charlotte. She actually taught me the term Navy shower. I thought it was pretty cool. From there, something a little bigger and a little better, you can actually look at if you have, say, if you're one of the lucky ones that have a wood cook stove in your kitchen, you can actually get, what is it, a water jacket they call it, or a side holding tank for hot water. You can also get and those are really nice because they fit right in. They look just like part of the stove. Or you can also get like an aluminum hot water tank or water tank that hooks on to, say, an in the living room stove. They're not as pretty, but who cares? They're basically a reservoir to hold a bunch of water that sucks some of the heat out of your wood stove and gives you some hot water. And then here's the cool thing. Using convection, you can actually pipe that into, say, an existing hot water tank so that, well, number one, if you're off the grid at the moment and you have no electricity, at least you have a big storage area for your hot water, or it can help you save some water doing it that way. You can actually even make a copper coil. These are really cool. I love these. I think I'm going to have to do an entire episode on these, like off the grid, oddball kind of things. Becky and I actually looked at doing one of these at one time, but you can buy the flexible copper and you can actually run it around your black stovepipe that comes up and out, out the chimney. There's a ton of waste heat there. And just as long as it's a short run, because if it's a long run, the last thing you want to do is cool your pipe down so much that the smoke condenses into creosote and cause you problems. But copper coil around your pipe or inside your pipe or inside the firebox, coil in a compost pile. Holy shit. I never thought of that. I haven't even seen that done, but I got to look that up. Is that actually a thing, Brian? Because to me, I could see how that would actually really, really work. And I love the idea. But yeah, so you can use any of that type of stuff to cycle using convection and pump it or plumb it up. You can actually use it to lift the water so that then you've got stored energy, and you could actually have hot water. Obviously, you're not going to get a lot of pressure out of it, but it's going to at least give you a good setup. Now, solar, of course. Yeah, I will. I'm going to YouTube that, Brian. That's really cool. So this can be simple or it can be complicated. But if you have, say, a roll, yeah. Oh, okay. So let's go into this here. Chris says we did a pool heater in the compost and it worked great. So I was going to talk a little bit about like a redneck pool heater. You know, you guys see those where people take 50 or 100 or 200 feet of that black poly pipe and they coil it up into a coil and then let it sit there in the hot water. You know, the sun beats down on it and, you know, it's basically passive heat. It's as simple as, say, putting a black bucket up on a shelf outdoors, letting it heat throughout the day, and then maybe tapping into it and making an outdoor shower. You know, whatever we need to have hot water, there's ways to do it. And now you guys really tickled my fancy, and I've got to take a look at this compost heater. I love that idea. I don't know how I've never heard that before. Very cool. Now, okay. And Brian says you can get thermal siphon and don't need a pump for some applications. Absolutely. And I think that's really cool. I watched a bunch of videos years ago on it, and we looked at doing it. And we just never really did it. You can even, if you're so inclined, you know, go to your local junkyard and get a junked hot water tank that still holds water and just use it as a holding tank. Super simple, off-grid kind of application. Now, one of the other ones, we used to sell these at Home Hardware, and I was kind of jealous about them. I love the system, and I wouldn't mind getting one at one time. But if you guys have ever seen, they look kind of, at first glance, they look like solar panels up on somebody's roof. But I think Nicole Sauce may have installed some of these recently, but I love them. They're these black tubes, and inside, depending on the system, but the ones we used to sell were black glass tubes, and they would make a big square, a big panel up on your roof. And inside them, from what I understand, was just a really, almost like a really fine line that went down. So almost to the point where the line was just thin enough to be basically a single drop of water, but all the way down. Now they were a closed system, so they had glycol in them or some kind of antifreeze. And the glass tube was black. And so it would basically absorb the heat really quick and it would superheat that. Then it would force it back up out of the tube, cycle it down through the system, and heat your hot water. And, you know, if you had good southern exposure and reasonable amount of sun hours every day for where you lived, it could supply all of your hot water and then some. And there was, if I remember correctly, there was zero power input needed. And there's not even solar panels, there are solar tubes. And I love the system. And I would love to hook one of them up, especially, you know, once it's just Becky and I in the home, and that's the only hot water we need, it would work really well. And the great thing is there's almost no moving parts in them. And as long as you know, you don't get hail the size of softballs, you should be good for a lot of years. From there, here's another one, you know, back to the 2 is 1, 1 is none, 3 is a guarantee. Portable propane. Hey, Sunnyland Camper showed up. Thank you, sir. Nice to see you. Yeah, portable propane. So I'm always a big fan. You guys have heard me talk about when you buy a piece of prepping gear, you really shouldn't buy it just because it's cool. A person should buy something because it has an everyday use as well, or at least an occasional use. I mean, the worst thing to do is just to buy something and be like, okay, I'm good for the end of the world. It's up on my shelf. I'm going to leave it there, right? We're not going to do that. But a portable propane heater, an on-demand heater, one of them that I've seen and I like, I wouldn't mind getting one to test sometime, is the EcoTemp L10. It works with a standard propane tank and it has a shower head built in. So the great thing about those is they work in your, so it works for when you're camping. So you've already got that, right? Most people already have propane tanks on hand, whether you grill or you have it for your generator, whatever it is. So number one, it's a great toy to have for camping, makes your life better, but it's also a great emergency situation, a great tool to have in an emergency. And one more thing, and I talk about this a lot, but sometimes I forget, I've got a self-contained living unit parked in my garage. So anybody who uses a camper or has a camper, even if it's winterized, I mean, my God, if worst case scenario, we have a way to heat hot water out in that camper, a self-contained unit that I can turn on. It's only, I think, a 10-gallon tank, or maybe it's even less than that, but it's there. It can be used. It's always about thinking outside the box. And hey, Justin, nice to see you. Says hit that like button. I always appreciate that, sir. John Grohl says my neighbor at the campground had a broken RV water heater. He had a hose on his he had hose on his trailer roof for warm water. That's actually not a bad idea. And talking about RV water heaters, they are somewhat accessible to work on. Oh, Sunnyland Camper lives in his camper. Very cool. I didn't realize that. I like that. So when I bought our camper, I got a really good deal on it simply because the guy, when he bought it, had plans of fixing it up. But the guy he bought it from never winterized it, at least the hot water tank. And so what ended up happening was the storage tank on it ruptured. Now, most of them, I didn't realize this until after I bought it. Most are a self contained unit. The tank and the heating assembly and everything are basically they're replaceable individually, but not always. So I was like, well, I can figure this out. So I went online, I found my parts for it, and I think it ended up being the cheapest. I bought an empty tank on eBay, and I pulled the whole thing out, and I ended up having to basically beat it off the old connection and really hammer it in there. But I ended up saving myself $600 to $700 at an RV dealership for $140 tank. And even if I'd have replaced the whole water heater and tank together, it would have been maybe $400. I can't remember. And that was out of the budget when we bought the camper for sure. So it was, yeah, always think outside the box, always look at parts. And when you're doing any of this, guys, something I haven't talked about a whole lot yet, but have your owner's manual. A paper one's great, but a lot of times you can actually find more information online than what comes, in the box nowadays. So when you first get your hot water tank, whatever it happens to be, find the model number, the serial number, and then find a PDF for it, and then find a parts breakdown as well. But the good thing about working on, like I said, almost all hot water tanks is every big box hardware store and even most small hardware stores carry basically all of the major parts. They're generic, they're interchangeable for the most part. As soon as I say every part is interchangeable and there's a generic version everywhere, somebody's going to say, yeah, but I've got this 1973, inverted hot water tank. And yeah, and Brian says YouTube is your friend. Yes, YouTube, have a parts breakdown. And here's the other thing. If you can't find a part for something locally, if you need it, what you want to do is find that parts breakdown, and then you want to just randomly type that part number into Google. Number one, you might find a cross reference, which is great, but more times than not, I've actually found parts on Amazon or eBay that I couldn't find searching on Amazon or eBay, but when I put it into Google, it found the part on Amazon or eBay. So for whatever reason, Google works way better than the native searches on eBay or Amazon. And quite often, I've been able to find parts, especially through Amazon, putting that part number into Google, adding the word Amazon, and you're good to go. So that's my 12 and a half cents worth about hot water. I figured we'd get in some hot water tonight, guys. I always love getting in hot water with you guys. All right, Tim, stop with the dad jokes. But yeah, so this is really all it is, guys. I want to empower you. I know a lot of you guys that are in here are relatively handy already. There's going to be a lot of other people listening to this and watching this down the road. And I just want to empower you guys to get out there, get shit done, and not be intimidated by it. Because, hey, anybody can do this. If I can do it, you guys can do it, right? So really, that's it for me this week, guys. Next week, we got episode 7 of Preparedness. I'm excited. We're actually going to talk. Did I put it in here? I did. We're actually going to talk about home appliances, something a little bit different. We're going to talk about the repairs we can do for fridges. Freezers ain't much for that. Fridges, stove, washer, dryer, that kind of stuff. We're going to dive deep into it. I'm going to, pick my brain a little bit. So if you guys have any questions about that ahead of time, send them off to me at therealtimcook@gmail.com or anywhere on social. No problem at all. Where else? So next to, yes, sorry. And then Sunday night, yes. Okay. Before we go, Chris says, well, if the women don't find you handsome, they got to at least find you handy. And for any of my American friends who don't know who Red Green is, take yourself a few minutes, go down the YouTube rabbit hole and watch Red Green. He is a Canadian treasure. He's kind of a more mellow version of Tim Taylor off the old Home Improvement show, but he's just, yeah, he's awesome. Fixes everything with duct tape. Thanks, Ted. We'll catch you again. And then Sunday night, guys, I got a really cool live stream. We've got, got a gentleman coming on talking about being a homesteading dad, what it takes to, balance homeschooling and kids and homesteading and the whole works. It's going to be awesome. I am excited. It's always good. And he's going to talk about the type of tools that he likes. Who doesn't like talking about tools? I know I do, right? So that's it for me this week, guys. One more quick thing. If you're listening on PBN, and especially if you're not listening on PBN, why aren't you? Prepper Broadcast Network. I love the guys over there. They've become like a family to me this quick. There's always awesome content. If you're looking, if you have, either ass time driving around or earphone time working, add them to your podcatcher and check it out. Because following me tomorrow night on PBN is going to be The Strange Truth with podcaster and author Carl A.D. Brown. It's always a lively discussion centered around Christianity, preparedness, and news stories no one dares to touch. So, guys, thank you. As always, stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week.